Okay, thank you, Professor Geffen, for this interesting lecture. Now we are welcoming Professor Daphna Hacker from the Faculty of Law at Tel Aviv University. Daphna is dedicated to issues of human rights of various segments in the population: women, older people, Holocaust survivors, and she is going to talk about filial relationships and the law, especially in relation to the older population. Right, Daphna? Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I have no idea how we're going to have 3 presentations in 20 minutes, but this is a very Mediterranean conference, apparently, so I'll try to be brief. I'm going to present major themes from 2 forthcoming papers that are dealing with the question of filial piety, that is the duty of grown-up children to care for their elder parents. We find this duty in several major religions, and here are examples, quotes from both Judaism, Islam, and the Confucius culture, in which caring for one's parent is one of the major obligations of a believing person. And under Confucius, for example, you cannot even develop your morality any further if you haven't fulfilled this very basic obligation towards your parents. We see in many countries that this is not just a vague and old obligation, moral obligation, but actually many of the people are dependent on the care that they are provided by their family members, including their grown children. So whether the parent actually lives in the same household as the grown children or lives elsewhere, many children care for their parents. And I want to give you some evidence from my study in Israel, in which I argued that in some cases there's actual role reversal, in the sense that the same duties that we see between parents and their minor children, caring for their food, stimulation, economic care, we see in old age when grown children become the parents of their parents. And we don't have the language for that, we don't have the social scripts for that, so the most acceptable vocabulary relates to childhood. And we can talk about that, but that's what I find from the in-depth interviews which I have conducted. So we see the role of representation in front of authorities. In the very Israeli way, a grown-up child can talk in the name of the parent, even if there's no guardianship order, just because, you know, that's the way we do things. One of my interviews came from Canada, an Israeli living in Canada. He said in Canada you would never have the authorities listen to the child and not asking, do you have a valid legal order to present that parent? And in Israel, you just, you pick up the phone and says, oh, I'm talking in the name of my father or mother. Can we just move things further? So indeed, grown-up children present their parents in front of the authorities and commercial entities, etc. Stimulation, grown-up children occupy their mind with how to stimulate the parent, even in cases of dementia, taking the parent outside, taking the parent to a movie, coming to visit, talking, etc. Physical care, it could be direct physical care in which the child feed the parent or bath the parent. And it can be indirect physical care in the sense that the child is responsible for finding the paid care and choosing the right institution for the parent. And economic assistance, again, this is an interesting case in which there were 3 children. They didn't think that the mother is in any economic deprivation, but the mother was concerned that there's not enough money in her bank account. So all children gave her money so she won't be stressed by this maybe imagined case of lack of resources. So we have these interviewees saying, you know, the mother in a severe case of Alzheimer's, she is like our baby. Or a grown-up child says about his mother, you know, I'm treating her like my daughter. This is the vocabulary we have for this role reversal. But I want to move on and question whether we have to legalize this role reversal, these duties that children might or might not perform to their parents. And actually, part of the study was doctrinal comparative law, and you see that in different countries, the answers are different. So even in the US, you have some states that have some kind of legal economic obligation towards one parent, and in other states, no obligation whatsoever. In France, there is special legal mechanism in which a parent can choose a child and enter into kind of a contract. You will care for me for the rest of my life, and you will inherit more than the other children, or you will be paid from this state, unlike your siblings. China is the country with the widest legal obligation, demanding children to care for all aspects of life of their parents, including visitation. And we already have court decisions in China in which children are fined for not visiting their parents. In Israel, we have two laws that are relevant for the question of legalizing filial piety. One is the maintenance law, that most Israelis, and we'll get back to that, know that parents have an obligation to support their minor children. They do not know that the same law says that if a parent cannot support him or herself, and a child, grown-up child, can support him or herself, her spouse, his spouse, and their minor children, the next in line is the parent. So there is an obligation to economically support the parents in Israel. Another relevant law is the welfare services law that says that if a person is in need and there is another person who the law says has to pay the first person maintenance, the first person does not sue the one that has to support him or her. The state can step in and sue that second person. When do we see this act come into action? When an elder person is entitled for public institutionalization in a nursing home, the state comes to the children, to the grown-up children, and asks for a share in the cost of that nursing home. And there is a very precise way of calculating how much each child has to pay, and it depends on the salary of that spouse, of the child's spouse. Okay, it's the whole nuclear unit finds itself in debt. What I wanted to know is are these laws activated, and what people think about it? So the first law is hardly ever activated by itself. Parents, Israeli parents, do not sue their children for maintenance. We see all these years only 7 published cases. Now in family court cases in Israel, many of them are not published, but such a small number says there's no phenomena of parents suing their kids. And that is so even though a quarter of elder people in Israel live below poverty level, so they might have enjoyed such kind of a support. Also, my study shows that many people are not aware of the law. They're not prepared for it, they're not discussing it, and the minute they become aware is only when the state sends this bill for the nursing public home. And here you have some examples, people saying to me, truly? I'm telling them about the law. Oh, we never heard of that. And it turned out again and again. And the last example here is of a daughter that she is poor herself, her father is in institution, and the state says you have to pay $100 every month to cover part of this cost. And this is the first time she ever heard there is such a law. The study also showed that there are normative disagreements between people and communities in Israel related to this obligation. So some say, oh, of course, this is, even if they didn't know of the law, they support it. They say it's great. My parents gave me so much when I was a child, now it's my turn. Or just a moral sentiment, you know, my parent is in need, of course I will assist. Of course the state has to enforce this obligation. But others object to the law, saying this is too harsh. And, you know, the sandwich generation in which I have to support my minor children and all of a sudden the state says, well, you now have to support also your elder parent, this is out of the question. And here is an example of the parent herself saying, no, it should be the state responsibility to make sure that I age with dignity. The study also shows that there are differences between different Israeli social groups. This is a very multicultural society. And for example, when I'm interviewing immigrants from the former Soviet Union or their children, they not only have they not heard of the civil law, they have not heard of the religious Jewish obligation that all other Israelis are aware of. So this is one extreme. On the other extreme are the Muslim interviewees that most of them have deep sentiment about the religious obligation. They know to cite from the Quran, and they feel, of course, we have to care for our parents. And we know that in this society, most elders will stay at home. They will not be sent to institutions, and the children will care on a daily basis. However, in a survey conducted by the Ministry of Health, most Israelis, both Jewish and Arabs, would have preferred that the state would not enforce this filial piety duty as a legal one, leaving it only in the moral, religious, ethical level. And indeed, recently in January this year, the Israeli government issued a new decision saying we want to minimize the obligation of children to support their parents in institutions. And there are three question marks because we don't really know if this decision is going to be implemented. You know, we are heading for an election. This is not law. This is a governmental decision. It's much weaker in its legal sense. And we have to see if the budget will be allocated so all those who need to be hospitalized for long-term care would do it on the state budget, and the state will stop going and pursuing the kids. What I want to suggest is that there are some lessons to be learned to other countries and contexts. One is that parents probably will sue their children only if there is no other way to survive, and in cases in which there was a familial conflict beforehand. And this, the Israeli finding correlates those of Yu Luxu from Renmin University in Beijing. She studied China and Singaporean law in action. Now, another theme is that poor parents usually have poor children. So thinking that these children will be the answer for the cost of elder, longer lives is really not very convincing. And lastly, realizing that in multicultural societies, different groups will perceive this duty differently. If we want to encourage children to care for their parents, we have to think not about legal sanctions, but about legal positive motivations. And here are some ways that we can try and do it, how to reward those children who think this is a moral obligation, not sanctioning those who cannot or do not wish to perform this filial piety duty. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Please.
I think that in that regard we need a bigger survey, and not a qualitative one, but a quantitative one. Note that in other surveys, see that female daughters take more everyday tasks, while the sons are involved, but more in this for the authorities. And when we're going back to the Arab section, it's very, very those who perform everyday care are either the daughters or the wives of the son.
What's your hypothesis? Other
I would guess it is true, but we have to check. However, there is indication, very gender. Again, another label that
is
yeah, I think the government and civil society is realizing that the care providers are an audience that has to be supported. So we have NGOs that are doing work with caregivers. We have funds that are doing this kind of training and developing the discourse and the language. But I can tell you that many family members still find themselves collapsing. And I think the most depressing Facebook page in Israel, it's called the Legal House for Dementia. And it's, of course, not the people with dementia, it's their family members. And honestly, I can read it once a week, not every day. The stories are horrible. There are no answers. The Israeli main answer is importing care from abroad, unlike in the States. This is the only kind of visa not limited by number. So whoever is eligible for 24/7-hour care can import an immigrant, mainly from the Philippines. So this is the Israeli way of coping. Other levels.
okay. Please.
Great question. Well, technology is in a sense already there. For example, Skype, the way for I'm working also on the challenges, not even living in the same. So how do you keep involved? And again, computer training for older people. And the more technology is there to assist, less you have to take care. But again, we know that the Chinese perception that you have to visit. Something again, how do we, after grandchildren, the maintenance of the law can go to the grandchildren and take care of it. But this is really socially unacceptable. You would never see a grandparent who put a lot of attention. Parents, the middle generation are really squeezed, and the grandchildren are an asset. They will learn so much. And we have more and more projects. For example, the project encouraging students to live with an elder parent. The student gets scholarship and rent for free. Very valuable. And we have to try and we have to follow.
Okay.
more than that, in the clinic for Holocaust survivors and elders in the Law Factory, which I kind of supervise, we are receiving more and more calls of older people who do not use their bank account. Branch is no longer physically there. Credit cards, no human response on the other side of the line. This is a major challenge. And again, even television, I don't know, those of you who are not Israelis are not familiar with that, but we had this major one national television channel, and it was transformed. So all the more older reporters were fired, and there's a new generation. And those who watched this TV channel were mainly old people, relatively old. They cannot follow now what's going on with this. The things that we are not thinking of, just happening, have to be voices. Those who cannot. I think that's why family law professors like myself are moving into elder law, because there's so much similarities.